Welcome to episode 30 on the journey to conscious healthcare. This is series 5, episode 1, and is called NDIS, Autism and Paediatrics, All You Need to Know. That's right, in this series, we talk to world-class experts within the field of autism and paediatrics to ensure you know the ins and outs of what to do. In this podcast, we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness, and fulfillment in your life and that of others. I'm your host, Trevor, and I'm the founder and CEO of Conscious Healthcare SA, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. Today's show is sponsored by Conscious Healthcare SA. Conscious Healthcare SA is now employing. That's right, we are creating ripples and making available more dream roles for practitioners to fulfill on what it is that they do best. Even better yet, we've got an international reach with some of our occupational therapists being based around the globe. So that's in France, the UK. How good is that for flexibility? If you're interested in exploring an allied health career where you genuinely get to explore patient-centered practice, please do get in touch, and I'll make sure within the show details we've got further information from there. Now, I'm really excited about today's guest. It's Josephine Barbaro from Latrobe University, who is a world expert in autism, having developed the SACS tool. There's no need to worry. She'll be covering more on that shortly. She is also a psychologist, and apart from really needing some expensive builders to reinforce her walls with all her accolades and achievements, she is an associate professor pioneering the way forward for autistic and neurodivergent people. Rather than going through a long introduction today, I'd love to keep it pretty organic and just get you to tell us a little bit more about yourself. So welcome to today's show, Josie.
Thanks, Trevor. Really happy to be here. Thank you.
Well, thank you. We'll kick off with quite an easy question. I'd love to know, just as we start off, what do most people not know about you? It could be a quirk, a habit, or hobby.
So there are a couple of things. I really enjoy photography. So I've done a few short courses after I finished my doctorate on digital SLRs and really love landscape photography and street art. And whenever I go traveling around the world, do chase street art and beautiful landscapes. So photography is a passion of mine. And I'm a 10-pin bowler as well. So I do that competitively. Just came back from a competition actually in Frankston. And my highest score is 267. So for those that understand anything about 10-pin bowling, it's pretty good.
That's sensational. I mean, 300's the pinnacle, right?
That's right. I'll get there hopefully one day. So
is that one error then? Is that only one error to get 267? Or it must be almost two.
Oh no, a couple. There's a couple spares, but besides that, it's all good.
Oh wow, I feel like I'm really not punching my weight there. I think my high score is maybe like 150 or 160. So like, I'm still riding a bike with training wheels on, I feel.
That's great. That's an excellent score.
Good fun. Well, Josie, I'd love to know what got you interested in autism.
Well, it was an interesting path actually, because when I started high school and went into VCE, I really thought that I wanted to work in IT, orthodontics at some stage because I got braces, IT because my uncle was in that space, and really didn't know what I wanted to do. But when I did psychology in VCE, it just captured my imagination. So I decided to go and do a Bachelor of Behavioural Science at Latrobe Uni. And the lectures that really captured my attention were those on child development. I was fascinated by them. I would just absorb every word, from those lectures. So when I went to go on to do my postgrad work, I then, sought out advisors that worked in child development. And so my supervisor, now Professor Cheryl Dissonaika, was working in the autism field. So that's actually how I fell into the autism field, without actually realizing that, so many of my family are neurodivergent, or family and friends, and that we have a lot of close connections in the family as well. So it started off that way, and now it's all about personal connections.
Oh, fantastic. I think it's great. I've got a personal connection myself, a family member that has autism, an autistic person. And I just think it's so amazing when you go along your journey, study, and then you end up finding something you're passionate about. I worked out very early on in my career as physio, it's all about the brain. And I thought, hey, if I can't get people to change their habits and behaviors, then I can't really influence them to be able to have a more positive life. So I really love that, you found your space and clearly stuck at it for a long time. So very passionate about what you're doing.
Yeah, totally. And I myself am a late diagnosed neurodivergent person. So I think that something that started off so organically and now has become so personal, the passion to help neurodivergent people is a personal as well as a professional one.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, what I might not do today, just in the course of time, is go through that wall of accolades we did speak about. I will have a link to your LinkedIn profile, which does cover lots of stuff, including lots of megabytes of data of accolades, as I was just mentioning. Having said that, I think it's really important. We're getting some juicy topics today. So I'd love to know about what your role is. You're a director. So what is it that you do, and how do you make a difference in the world?
So I'm an associate professor at OTARC and director of the Identification and Diagnosis program. And that started because of my work in early detection and diagnosis of autism. But we are now expanding that to across the lifespan. And I guess there are two main gaps. The main gaps in the field in terms of identification and diagnosis is of very young children, so infants, toddlers, and early preschoolers.
Can we just clarify on that one? So when we talk about infants, toddlers, and preschoolers, age-wise, just for the Joe public to get their head around, and also if you could elaborate on what OTARC stands for as well, some might not know.
Yeah, sure, we'll do. So OTARC stands for the Olga Tennyson Autism Research Centre, and that's at Latrobe University, and that's named in honour of the late Olga Tennyson, who essentially provided funding for the start of this centre over a decade ago, and left a large bequest in her will to ensure that the centre exists in perpetuity. So because she wanted to make a difference in the lives of autistic people. So, we're really grateful to her and the legacy that she's left to the world for autistic people. So the other question that you asked was about what are infants, toddlers, and preschoolers. So I'm talking about babies, children, but starting from around about 11, 12 months of age, all the way up to 3 to 5 years of age for preschoolers.
Yeah, perfect. And as far as moving forward in your role, what's its purpose and overall goal that you would like to see achieved?
So the overall goal, honestly, is to improve the outcomes of neurodivergent people and ensure that the lives of neurodivergent people are happy, healthy, and living the best possible life that they can and that we can. So it's about engaging in research that's co-produced with autistic and neurodivergent people for neurodivergent people. So nothing about us without us. So that's the ultimate purpose of what we do and why we do it. And that is to ensure that research directly impacts the community and creates real impact. And that is the only reason why I started in this field and did a PhD to begin with, as opposed to a clinical degree, which I did later, because I wanted to create impact and I was not going to do research that did not create direct impact for the community.
I totally get that. I think your words you said there before was nothing about us without us. It very much fits along the line. It's a catchphrase word. Having said that, I do feel like it is getting used in the right tone and environment now. Minister Bill Shorten's very much talking about co-design. So you're very big in regards to making sure that you are working with people, understanding what's happening, how can we actually better this, and having, I think the co-design approach, they very much talk about having everyone sitting around the table, whereas some of the models as they have existed tend to be, hey, what's cheap and easy to make it look like maybe we're making a difference, where this is actually hearing it out, and maybe some of the priorities might change around, because priorities, if you had 10 of them, maybe 1 to 4 might have been cheap and easy, but if you did 1 to 4, then you actually miss the main point. So it sounds like, this way we're getting a greater impact for any dollar spend, and also that really important voice to be heard, which has been silenced maybe for many years. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, absolutely. And in terms of that catchphrase, there's an even better one, in that nothing about us without us, and more than one in the room, i.e. it's not a tokenistic endeavour, that there are, multiple neurodivergent people in the room from different backgrounds, different walks of life. And in the past, if autistic people were involved, it was at an advisory capacity, whereas we now are looking at involving from the very beginning, co-production from the very beginning of our research questions all the way to the implementation of our research in the community. And so that amazing. I'm super passionate about that, and have developed an autistic advisory group at OTARC specifically to assist with co-production of research.
Oh, that's fantastic. I mean, a few things on that. One, shout out to Assistant Minister Emily Burke, who's been working, been appointed by the Premier, Malinowskis, which is fantastic. I think that's a great step forward. And Minister Bill Shorten also gave a shout out as far as saying that South Australia is very much leading the way in that place. Obviously, funding and other things do need to change. We'll get into that a little bit more later, but what we might jump into is, how does someone with autism receive a diagnosis? Can you walk us through what that process and journey looks like, please?
Sure. So I guess what I could do is talk about what tends to happen in the real world what would happen based on my research. So what tends to happen in the real world is that parents will notice that their child is perhaps not talking by the age of 2, or they may not be responding when someone calls them. And they notice that other kids are different to their child. And so then they'll, go to their GP or whoever. And a lot of the time they will be told to wait and see. Oh, he's just a boy, he'll grow out of it. No need to worry, let's just wait. And
may I ask about that? When you're talking about wait and see, is this because Joe Public, GP, or whoever that is not informed enough about autism, about the education? I know this is another huge piece. But is that why that occurs? Because wait and see is not really a words of affirmation, I don't think, to any good parent, right?
Yes, correct. And it is getting much better over the years as many more frontline health professionals are becoming more educated about autism and its early presentation. But it is about thinking that autism is not diagnosed until 3 years and older, whereas, my research is showing that you can diagnose earlier. And so parents, unfortunately, go from one professional to another, wondering why their child's different. And then finally get to the point where a professional will hear their queries and concerns about their child's development, and then we'll refer to, say, a pediatrician or a psychologist, so that they can undertake a diagnostic assessment for autism.
And what sort of ages are we talking here? I think we might have mentioned about 3 years of age initially. What age would the child potentially be at this stage?
So
no diagnosis yet, though, right? So they're going along the journey, but what time are they starting?
Look, a lot of kids won't start that journey until around 3+. A lot of kids, it'll start around prep when teachers are noticing differences. So it really depends on the situation, obviously, but the average age of diagnosis in Australia for under 7s is 4 years of age. So that's still actually quite late compared to how early we can detect and diagnose.
Absolutely.
But if we would look right across the age span, the average age is, between 4 to 7 years of age in terms of diagnosis.
And how long does that journey take? So I've heard there that ultimately we're finding out at about 3 years of age. We're getting told, hey, don't worry about it. Then at 3 years of age, we're like, hey, there's still more problems, and they start along that journey. But I think it was like, between 4 and 7, you end up officially getting a diagnosis?
Yeah, that's the average sort of global diagnosis rate, or the age at which you get diagnosed. But in terms of waiting, research is showing that from the time in which parents have first queries or concerns about their child's development to the time that they receive a diagnosis, on average, is 4 years. So
4 years.
that is a huge
That's a
lag.
big gap.
Yeah, big gap. So even if you were wondering when your child's first born, my child's a bit different. They won't be 4. They will be 4 before they even receive their diagnosis. And that, again, is on average, of course. Every family is different. And I also I want to reframe the way we talk about, querying our children's development. So rather than being concerned about our child's development, it's, I'm wondering why my child's a bit different. And so parents, querying, why is my child different? And reframing that from concern around to query.
Yeah, no, I totally get that. It's a bit disconcerting, because I suppose what I'm picking up here is, if I'm a parent in that situation, which I'm not yet, I do anticipate on having children, but if I was a parent in that situation, I feel like a lot of my worries and concerns are not listened to. And I think I would feel a bit alienated because of some of the challenges you might well face, because not having known and had the support and being able to done the research, whatever that looks like. I don't know if that sort of tends to be painting a normal picture for an average Joe parent.
Yeah, absolutely, because there's a lot of guilt and self-blame. Oh, my child is different because I'm doing something wrong. Why? What is it that I'm doing that is, creating a situation where my child's different? Why is my child not doing this? Why is my child not doing that? Why is my child doing this, but that child's not doing that? And so rather than you're helping that parent to understand that, well, actually your child is autistic, there's nothing bad or wrong about them at all. They have a different brain, a different neurotype. There's nothing that you're doing that's causing this at all, because autism is just a different way of being. And here are some things that you can do to help your child, and also some things that you can do to understand how your child communicates. So your child may communicate in a different way to the child next door. And here's the way that your child communicates. Let's tune into how they communicate. How can you match their communication style, and then help them to learn and thrive and grow?
Oh, that's fantastic. And let's say if I have got a child now in front of me, they are to get let's say it's deemed that an assessment would be appropriate. How does that work from there? Like, as in, they're in front of you, is it the DSM-5? What process do we go through?
So the DSM is the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Mental Disorders, and it's, as from the title you can hear, it's not a very nice title, right? And
No.
The fact that something like autism is in there is something that there is a bit of sort of controversy, I guess, even around what's considered a disorder. And so, because we do talk about autism as a disability, as an identity, and disability often arising from the environment, the environment not meeting that person's needs. But yes, in order to receive a diagnosis of autism, you need to meet the criteria in the DSM. And the way that the criteria are written in the DSM is actually very deficits-based. So it's based on essentially focusing on what neurotypical people see as deficient. And so what I try and do as a neurodiversity affirming psychologist is, when I'm looking at these criteria, to look at them objectively and talk about them in terms of, does your child engage in X behavior or not in X behavior, rather than is your child deficient in this and deficient in that. So rather than, for example, social communication deficits, it's about social communication differences. Yes, your child communicates differently, and so therefore they meet criteria for that particular one. So a psychologist or a pediatrician or a child psychiatrist would go through the DSM, do a diagnostic assessment, use DSM criteria to see if a child meets that, and then a child will receive a diagnosis after that.
Yeah, okay, now that all makes sense. Deficits versus strengths-based, or geez, a huge topic. I'd love to jump into it now. I don't know if we're going to have time. What we might do is, I do believe you are famous, so I do feel very privileged to be speaking to you here today, Josie. You're famous about this SACS tool. What's the SACS tool that you've developed, and what's the impact in the world? Because I think it is changing the world in a big way, I hear.
So, Trevor, I think your definition of famous is quite niche, but sure.
We'll go with it, right?
I guess I'm well known in certain aspects of the community around a screening tool or a developmental surveillance tool that I developed during my PhD. So SACS stands for Social Attention and Communication Surveillance. And essentially what it is training early childhood professionals or early medical professionals, maternal child health nurses, general practitioners, psychologists, psychiatrists, all allied health, etc., and even early childhood educators on how autism presents very early. So at 12 months, at 18 months of age, 24 months of age, and at 42 months of age. And so I developed a series of checklists that professionals can use to observe the child and to see whether or not they're presenting with early traits of autism. And so we've monitored over 36,000 children across two studies, to the SACS and the original SACS, and now the SACS revised and the SACS preschool. And we've found
noting
that
the different ages with that. So they're two different things, ages, and ultimately we've already expressed, as per earlier, it's really important to be able to pick things up earlier. So the pre one's fantastic as well, right? Yeah,
that's right. So the preschool is really to pick up those kids that may not present with the signs earlier. And so the tool has an accuracy of 83%. So of all the children that are at high likelihood for an autism diagnosis on the SACS tool, end up with an autism diagnosis. And we pick up 96% of all autistic children by preschool age with this tool. So it's not only 96%.
Accurate. Would you say that that's somewhat effective? I mean, for me, hey, 96%, like, if I've got lots of people, right, 96%, we ain't missing too many, right? So sounds like a highly effective and great way to put, government money or money in regards to getting this tool and support early. It sounds like it's very effective.
Yes, it is, and it's been a long journey, many studies to get here, and we're very proud as a team of the work that's gone into it, and also proud that we've been able to do that here in Australia. And develop the world's most effective and accurate, developmental surveillance tool for autism in very young kids.
Oh, that's fantastic. And you think of the ripple effect at Conscious Healthcare SA, one of our values is we create ripples, and it's certainly a very great demonstration there of, this is world class. This isn't something that's just on any sort of shelf and it's not just doing okay. We're talking, 96%? It's a huge accolade. And, I'm very proud to be speaking of you, and certainly really hopeful for the future that many more people will get access to this tool and training earlier so that we can end up changing lives and families well into the future.
Yeah, absolutely. Because we find that the earlier that you can identify an autistic child, the better their outcomes. They have greater placement in schooling. They have better cognitive outcomes. So that means that fewer of them have an intellectual disability. So, for example, 8% of children diagnosed early, so before 2.5, that are autistic end up with an intellectual disability. But that's compared to 1/4 of all children diagnosed later, so after the age of 3. So for us, it's about ensuring that we are promoting that autistic child's development as an autistic child, whilst trying to lower levels of intellectual disability, because that impedes your ability to learn. So
absolutely, and what that looks like moving forward, right?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
So I'll let you continue there.
Oh, it's okay. Sorry, what were you saying?
Oh, no, I was just saying, like, as in, you can imagine if that starts at an early age, you just think of the ripple effect, right? Like, as in, education is one of the greatest gifts that you can give anyone, to be able to pave their own way and have a say in what that future looks like. And you're really saying, hey, we can work with autistic people so that they're able to have a better quality of life at a sooner time and be able to contribute more, I'm assuming, have greater purpose and meaning, quality of life, all these different things is what I'm hearing. I don't know if I'm hearing any of that wrong.
Yeah, no, that's all 100% correct. And it's about educating the public as well about autism and about differences, so that the stigma around autism is reduced, because a lot of autistic people are bullied from a very early age because of being different. And so, if we can help autistic people to understand their identity early, find their community, and then educate the public about differences and acceptance of any difference, then that reduces trauma and improves quality of life. So it's not just on the individual. We need to also work on society and how we perceive difference and acceptance of difference.
Oh, absolutely. Well, we've definitely got more topics coming up further in regards to inclusion, which I think that's certainly where that bridges on. And a lot of this is labeling and different things from that. What I might do before we do jump into that, because that's also something you've got a conversation piece on, is ask you about your AS Detect. So you've got an app that you've developed. I hear that's having some great results.
Yeah, so the AS Detect app is a free app that's available on Apple and Google Play stores. Mm-hmm. And it, like the SACS, it has 3 checks, the 12-month check, the 18-month check, and the 24-month check. Mm-hmm. We haven't yet got the preschool check in there, but I'm seeking funding for that 4th check.
Oh, so look at that. Anyone that's got a wallet, right? Does anyone own a wallet or a purse?
Please. So we and it's a very, very effective app. So we've just hit our 100,000 downloads. So we'll have a little celebration next year about that. But essentially what it is it's an app that has videos of all of the early signs of autism. So short, sharp videos between 30 seconds to a couple of minutes. And it shows the difference between an autistic child and a non-autistic child in, for example, behaviors like eye contact, response to name, pretend, play, use of language. And then it has a question for the parent, and then the parent will answer whether their child mostly engages in that behavior or rarely engages in that behavior. It takes about 15, 20 minutes to complete. And then after the parent completes it, the parent will get a result about the child's likelihood for an autism diagnosis.
Oh,
and so we're finding that we've done an evaluation study, and we're finding that it's highly, highly accurate. So 90% plus of people who are identified via this app as being high likelihood of being autistic are autistic. So it's highly effective, and yeah, any parent out there that wishes to use it can download it for free and use that.
Oh, that's fantastic. In that app, do you have you walking through that? Or I wonder, potentially, we don't have to, but it might be a good thing for us to have you walk through a couple of videos maybe at another stage. Potentially, I don't know if you've already got on there, you or one of your colleagues walking through that information.
Yeah, so what I've actually done with these videos is I'm walking the parent through what they're seeing. So yeah. There's a video, short video of, for example, a couple of autistic children and the behavior eye contact, for example. And I'm explaining, so see how this child is looking down at the toys rather than looking at the person in front of them, for example. And so then I'll narrate that, and then I'll say, and now we're going to look at a child, a different child, and see how that child's looking up after, the wind-up toy's been activated. And then I'll pause on that behavior so they can see. So actually I'm walking the parent through the videos.
Oh, lovely.
So that we can, direct them to those behaviors so they can answer the questions more accurately than if you were to just ask them a question, does your child make eye contact? Like that, it's just...
That's fantastic. Because context is so decisive and important. So it sounds like we don't need that because you've already done the 2 steps ahead of us. I really do appreciate that. Whilst we were talking about the DSM-5 earlier, what's its relevance to the NDIS? Like, why does the DSM-5 matter? Noting that that's you end up getting a diagnosis. And why does this matter to the NDIS at all?
So, although the initial intention of the NDIS was to be diagnostic agnostic, and that means that you shouldn't have to have a specific diagnosis of any particular condition or disability, it is about functional impact on your life. It has gotten to the point where there are, for example, diagnoses of autism that are immediately included, as long as there's also functional need, and then conditions or disabilities like ADHD that are not immediately included as requiring support, even with a lot of, proof that there is functional impairment or need for those individuals. So DSM obviously provides the framework for a diagnosis of a disability. But what's been happening in autism is that, so in autism, there are 3 levels of support. Level 1 requiring support, level 2 requiring some support, and then level 3 requiring very substantial support. Now, the DSM itself states these levels should not be used to determine support services and funding for individuals. But that is what does tend to happen, so that if an individual receives, for example, a diagnosis of autism level 1, then the onus is on that family and that person to prove that they truly need funding from NDIS due to, functional impact in their daily lives. Whereas if you receive a diagnosis of autism level 3, then they're, almost immediately included. So I think that those are still issues that we certainly need to work out and really come back to functional need rather than specific diagnoses for anything. 100%.
And I think like context in that as well. I was working with Purple Orange only last week, an inclusion workshop, and I think it was really fascinating. Say you've got a teacher and the teacher has a child and they can do something in the morning, but they can't do it in the afternoon. Understanding that an autistic person, they might have hit that threshold, or lots of different things can affect that. And that's ultimately then going to change whether or not you need certain supports and funding, right? Which is, I think, a very topical discussion, certainly welcome. And I'm sure we will have a further conversation with Assistant Minister for Autism, Emily Burke, in regards to what she's doing. And we heard a lot on the day when we were at Adelaide Oval. Whilst I am talking about that, so you were there, I'd love to know your key takeaways from when we were at Adelaide Oval. So we had Minister Bill Shorten, the NDIS Minister, and as I mentioned there before, Assistant Minister for Autism, Emily Burke, and yourself, obviously world expert in autism. What were your key takeaways from the day and what you'd like to see moving forward?
Yeah, I think one of my key takeaways was what Minister Shorten was actually talking about, which is what we were just talking about, which is funding based on need and the people receiving the appropriate services and focusing on the fact that funding for the NDIS should not be seen as a burden to the taxpayer. That funding for the NDIS is for all of us. We are, most of us are taxpayers, whether disabled or not. Most of us are contributing to society in one way or another. And that by helping people to become more independent or to be able to participate more in society by having access, obviously, to NDIS funding is what we should be focusing on. And so I really liked that Minister Shorten focused on that fact that NDIS is critical and important and something that we need to nurture rather than cutting. And the takeaway I got from Minister Burke was obviously the importance of understanding autism in the school setting and in classrooms, and in ensuring that children not only are identified and diagnosed, but receive, the appropriate supports and services in the school system. And South Australia, I think, are going to be the leaders in the country on that, given the autism strategy and the importance and focus on autism in South Australia now.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. And I think following on to that as well, whilst we talk about NDIS relevance, if you don't have a diagnosis by, depending on state, I think it's 7 years of age, you either go through the pathway 0 to 6 or 7 in early childhood, and then you go beyond where it's onto the normal NDIS access. So fundamentally, having a diagnosis is pivotal to then being able to get NDIS supports and funding. So I think that even adds weight to it as well. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's critical to have screening for autism, for example, so that if a child is at a higher likelihood of an autism diagnosis, then they can get into the early access approach. But obviously, that child will require a diagnosis prior to 7 because children then go into NDIS, and if they don't have a diagnosis, then that's it. No more supports after 7.
Yeah, and I remember just reflecting again on the event at Adelaide Oval. It was very much spoken about how NDIS wasn't designed as the only lifeboat in the ocean, and ultimately, whose responsibility is it? Like, who funds it? Ultimately, we've got people that need help, right? And personally, I actually don't really particularly care whose responsibility it is. I just want to make sure that they get the help they need. So I don't know if you've got any particular thoughts. Like, if you had one key wish for the NDIS, what do you think that might be? Don't you think maybe screening might be something that might be worth getting funded? I'd love to know what your thoughts are.
Look, I guess at the end of the day, it's an insurance scheme, right? And so the purpose of an insurance scheme is to, prevent further costs down the line. And so if we can screen children early and give them the right supports and services early, then not only does that improve that child's life, the family's life, increases positive self-identity, it actually saves billions of dollars across the lifespan. And there are many reports out there showing that early supports and services, early screening, and early identification saves lifelong costs because of reduced need for supports across the lifespan, more independence, more participation in the community. So my one wish for the NDIS is let's fund screening for autism and neurodivergent conditions, because ultimately that will help the NDIS to save money, which is one of the barriers to more people accessing the NDIS.
Oh, I think it's fantastic. I mean, we are talking here on the 15th of December, and all I want for Christmas is early screening, right? Let's get this happening. What we might go on to as well was, I think that there was further information as well, what you said earlier. Dylan Alcott this year very much talking about employment, talking about, hey, we've got to really make this right. We haven't had this number in regards to employment numbers for people with disability in about 30 years. And you spoke earlier about intellectual disability being reduced, and I think you said about the workforce being greater integrations into the workforce by having these early assessments and work. Is that correct?
Greater integration into mainstream schooling. However, that, of course, then leads to the greater likelihood of tertiary education, employment. So it's all linked, and it begins at that very, very early stage. And that has a cascading effect right across that person's life in terms of access to schooling, access to supports, access to university, employment, and participation in society. So we go right back to the beginning, help that kid and that family early on, and that will have an impact and a ripple effect, as you've mentioned it a number of times, throughout that person's life, throughout that family's life, throughout the community's life, throughout society.
No, it's huge. I'll be very interested to see this getting taken up, and I'm sure we'll be talking in a couple of years' time with all the success of this. But before we get to do that, you've also written a conversation piece on the conversation about talking to your child about their early autism diagnosis, I understand, and the stigma associated with labels. What is there to know about this, and what's that in summary?
Yeah, so I guess this was inspired by a few things. What I was finding was we were diagnosing, our little ones as autistic very early, 1 to 2 years of age, and then we'd be following them up at 5 years of age, and then again at 7 and 9 years of age. And we were finding that even by 9, some of these children didn't know that they were autistic. So parents had not disclosed to them. And so research has subsequently come out showing that if a child doesn't actually know about their autism diagnosis, they actually have lower positive identity, lower self-esteem. They talk about autism more negatively compared to those that know about their autism diagnosis. And the research has shown that the earlier a child knows, then the better their outcomes in terms of self-esteem and identity, right? And so the reason why parents may not tell their children is because they're worried about labeling. And what autistic people have told us, so they're worried about stigma around labeling. And what autistic people have told us is that actually children will get labeled regardless. Instead, it'll be really harmful words like weirdo or, strange, instead of autistic. And so they say, well, actually, I'd prefer to be called autistic rather than a weirdo, right? And so what the piece is really about is saying, hey, let's talk about autism early with our kids who are autistic. This is how you can do it depending on their age, so whether they're really young or whether they're older, and also depending on their, whether or not they are verbal or minimally verbal or, have an intellectual disability or not, so that we should be talking about it regardless of the way, the autistic presentation of that child. So it's a really great piece for parents to have a read, and it links to a lot of research around it as well.
Oh, that's fantastic. I'll make sure that we get that into the show notes. I think that's a real conversation starter there, just about having these conversations. And I can only imagine that if you aren't aware that you're autistic, you just think you're different, you're weird, maybe you don't have these certain skills. Whereas actually, hey, it's just, ultimately I think to myself, if I apply, I'm a very visual person. So for me to learn, I really like seeing pictures, and that's how I work best. Now, everyone works differently. Obviously, an autistic person is just the same. And ultimately, having that knowledge and understanding is going to have that person better thrive in whatever environment that they is. And also, given that we're talking a lot about young children, that's going to have the parent be able to create the environment, because ultimately the parent has a big influence on what that environment looks like. And so it sounds like that's just a perfect recipe for flourishing, thriving. I don't know what your thoughts are there.
Yeah, absolutely. It's about understanding your neurotype, your way of being early. And ultimately, it's up to you who you disclose that information to, of course. But you yourself, to know who you are and why you are the way you are, is so important, because you also then find people that are just like you, and you can find your community. And finding community, regardless if, for example, you're part of the LGBTQI plus community, the gender diverse community, the autistic or neurodivergent community, or any other minority community, it's important to know who you are, because then you can find your community. And honestly, it's the best thing ever when you find your people.
Oh, fantastic. It reminds me a lot of having spoken to the DEAI, so the Developmental Education Association president, Catherine Amir. She was fantastic. And I feel like that's going to be another conversation piece. There's many really good people in this space. We're up to our last question here. I know you did answer this a few months ago, so we might see if it's changed or not. Let's pretend it's 20 years into the future and we have achieved success in the disability space. What does it look like? What does it feel like? Paint me a picture.
So let me tell you a funny story. I saw Dylan Alcott on the plane right after the NDIS forum. And I've bumped into him a couple of times, and I said to Dylan, "Hey, Dylan, I was asked this question at this forum, and this was, my answer." And my answer was essentially that I want to see autistic and neurodivergent people, or disabled people with disabilities, being at the upper echelons of NDIS. So they are the ones that are running disability services for disabled people. And he said, 20 years? Nah, make it 5. And I'm like, good point. Good point.
I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
I love that. We'll have to hit Dylan up as well. And also on that note, I think we're very excited to see about Kurt Fernley's new role. And we've got many more things that are happening in that space. So that's fantastic. Yeah. That does bring today's episode to an end. I hope you have found it educational and learnt something from it. As fellow Aussies, we know that there's nothing worse than being stingy. If you've got value from this, please do feel free to share this with anyone who you think may benefit, whether that's a participant, a support coordinator, or whoever that happens to be that you think would get benefit from it. Josie, before we do close off, do you have any final words for our listeners?
Final words. Let's accept and embrace difference. Let's change the world. Let's not live in a cookie cutter world where we want everyone to be the same. Let's accept and embrace difference, and ultimately will genuinely change the world.
Oh, that's lovely. As always, if you have any feedback for me, please do get in touch via email. Likewise, if you're after allied health services, please get in touch with us at Conscious Healthcare SA. The details, as will all the fantastic resources that Josie has got us in touch with, will be in the show notes, and we'll see you on the next episode.